Hi, I'm Sherry Gage, owner of Cone 6 Designs. Welcome to the virtual Vermont Sheep and Wool Festival. I'm going to show you today a little bit of my work and then also the process of making an enamel button from beginning to end. Here are some examples of my ceramic buttons and my enamel buttons. And some of them have images that I have photographed and printed on the buttons, and some are just simple transparent color on the copper button. Here are some examples of some of my earrings as well. On my website, which is on Etsy, you can find my earrings, my buttons, and a few of my ceramic cups. Here are some examples of clothing items that I have taken the buttons off that were on them and put on some of my buttons. In addition to enameling, another area of my work is ceramics, and of course I do the ceramic buttons, but also I make ceramic lidded vessels. That's something I've been working on recently, where I am actually combining enamel and ceramics together with an image that I photographed, so it's kind of putting everything together. So this would be an example of that, with hand thrown on a wheel image of a dragonfly that I photographed and had printed in copper and then fired onto the this piece after the glaze firing, and then this piece of enamel was sheet copper that was formed into a dome by hand and then enameled, and then that fits onto the top. Okay, so let's do some kiln-fired enameling. The first thing I'm going to show you is how to prepare the copper. So I start with a piece of copper that has 2 holes in it to make a button out of. This is going to be a large one, just so you can see what I'm doing. And then if I'm making ceramic buttons, this is not the kiln I use for that, but this ceramic button is made out of porcelain. It's been through the first firing to make it hard, but it hasn't been glaze fired yet. And that's really what I'm going to show you about the ceramic buttons today. But the enamel buttons, so what we do is, first of all, just clean the copper really well so that it can be, so that the enamel can adhere. The enamel is a glass that is formulated to adhere to the copper, but it's like powdered glass is the best way I could describe it, and it's very finely ground so that it can be applied very evenly onto the copper. So I'm just right now using soap and water, and I'm scrubbing this piece of copper so that all the oils come off of it. And I'm going to rinse it in my water here. And actually, just to really make sure that there's no oil on it, I tend to just pop it in my kiln for a short little bit at around 800 or 900 degrees. If you want to soften copper, you can anneal it, and annealing happens at a temperature of about 1150 degrees is usually what I set my kiln for annealing, but that's not what I'm doing right now. Right now, I don't want to soften the copper to work with it. I just want to put the copper in the kiln. I'm going to put it on this little trivet. I just want to put the copper in the kiln just to take off any extra oil. And so you can see the kiln is here, my little trusty kiln, and the temperature on that kiln about 800 degrees. Okay, I think that's probably good. I don't want it to get all darkened from oxidizing. I just want it to get the oil off. So normally with enameling kilns, when you're working with enamel, you're working with a kiln that gets to be about around 1400, 1500 degrees. So it's very hot. It's important that you have your hair back, you have your shoes on, things like that when you're enameling. I enamel in my home, so it's easy to get lazy, but I do not take chances with those things because I don't want to get injured. So, next step is I have my piece of copper and it's cooling down, so I'm gonna be able to work with it on here. So, let's see if you can see what I'm doing. So, I'm working on a piece of magazine paper just so that the enamel will collect and I can reuse it. All right, so let's get an enamel. I'm planning to do a Luna moth to give you an example of the whole process for doing that. Right here I have some gray enamel, which is what I tend to use on the back. The back needs to be enameled so that it doesn't warp. So both sides of the button have to have enamel on it. And so it ends up being, so I'm sifting this glass material onto the copper piece until it's well coated, but I don't want a thick layer. I just want it well coated. I'm going to pick it up and put it onto my little trivet, which is still a little bit hot. And I'm going to do that very carefully so as not to mess up the enamel that I have on here now. So that's coating of enamel. Now, for this step, I have to turn up my kiln. So I'm going to go ahead and turn up my kiln, and that's going to take a few minutes for it to get to the right temperature. So I'm going to do that, and I'll be right back. While we're waiting for my kiln to heat up, you can see my studio dogs hanging out here for a little entertainment. Today, this is Juno. She's a black and tan coonhound rescued from Northeast Coonhound Rescue, and there's Finn. He is 11 years old, and he has been with us for 10 years. Okay, here we are. Kiln is up to temp. You can see that it looks different than earlier when it wasn't very hot. So the temperature of 1400 degrees, we've got glowing light coming out of the kiln, and I've got my special protective glasses so that I don't damage my eyes from the brightness of the kiln. And I'm going to use this fork to hold my trivet, and that's what's going in the kiln. So this is going to go in, and it's going to stay in there just about a minute. Well, what I do is I wait for it to get up to temperature, up to the 1400, so it cooled down a little bit when I open the door. When it gets back up to temperature, then I'm going to let it sit for maybe 30 seconds. Once it's done that, I'm going to take it back out. So it's fairly quick in and out of the kiln. It doesn't go in for a long, long time. Right now we're at 1339, so it'll take about another minute or two to get back up to 1425. Okay, so the kiln's pretty much back up to temperature. I'm going to leave it in there a little bit longer, and I'm going to save the gray color that I put on the back and put it back in its container so it doesn't get mixed up with the other colors. That's the beauty of that. Okay, now we're going to pop it out of the kiln, and hopefully it's looking good. We're doing the back right now. Let's see how this looks. hot. See that red hot? Okay, now we're gonna put it there. And at this point, I can't touch it with my hands because it's very hot. So I usually just grab it with a set of tongs and set it on my countertop, which is soapstone, and it's going to cool pretty quickly. Now it's cooling right there. This is still very hot. Don't want to forget that. And if you see over here, this crock pot, it's labeled acid. It's not really that bad acid. It's actually only citric acid in there. I have used other types of acid before, but this is very mild. And what it does is that once my copper has gone in the kiln, it oxidized. So we've got enamel on one side. On the other side, we've got fire scale, which is the oxidized copper. So we're going to have to clean that off before we go farther. And how I do that is putting it in the acid and letting it sit there until it clears that off the back. And now let's see if it looks any better. I have to use copper to take things in and out of here. Otherwise, other metals will get into my acid bath. So let's see how that looks. It's all the black came off. There's still a little bit left. I'm gonna just take a brass brush and kind of clean that off. Now, I would normally just put that back in for a little longer, but I think the enamel will still adhere, so we're gonna move on. But usually I wait till it's completely gone. Okay, so the next layer to go on is just gonna be a basic white. Now remember, I'm making a Luna Moth button, which is a pale green color, kind of close to the color of a Luna Moth. I mixed my own color to make that the way I want it to be, that green, light green. But before we get to that color, we're going to use the white just to put a layer between the color that we want and the copper, just to make it so that our color, when we do get it, is nice and pure. So I have this little wire tool here just to make sure my buttonholes don't get filled, because that's the whole point, right? You're making a button and then you fill the buttonholes. Believe me, it can happen easily, both on enamel buttons and ceramic buttons. If you fill the buttonholes with glaze and you don't clear it carefully, or it just melts into those holes in the kiln, then you lose a whole button after all that work. So here we're going to go back into the kiln, putting on my special glasses and my gloves to protect me from the heat. And here we go. I'm going to lift that up, and in she goes. So this is the second firing now. Takes quite a few firings. I can do more than one at a time. When I'm making buttons, and I'm making a lot of them, I can make usually about 6 can go in at a time into the kiln, so it can be a little bit faster than this, but it is a fairly long process. So I'm just waiting for that temperature to come up in the kiln, and then the next color that we're going to use is this, what I call Luna Moth green. I don't know if you can see the color right, but it's a nice color. I like it. The other thing that I use is these images. So in order to get my Luna Moth image, you can see I have them printed here on this piece of special paper, special backing on this paper. It's on a very clear film, and the paper comes off, and this image slides onto the button when it's wet. And so what happens is these pictures, I have gone to insect collections, or sometimes I get pictures in my yard of insects that are willing to pose for me, but that's not very often. So, you know, I might go to insect collections, I might go to the Natural History Museum, wherever I am, I might shoot some photos, or a great place to go are those live butterfly museums where they're out and land on you and things like that. But then I have to kind of clear it up in Photoshop so that I just have the picture of the butterfly itself. And then I can print it on my printer. It's a printer that has iron oxide in the toner, so that when it prints, it prints with iron oxide. Looks black and white on here, but when it fires, it will actually fire a brown color. Iron oxide is rust, and so it basically fires a reddish brown color when it's done. All right, it sounds like to me that this is ready to come out of the kiln, and it's up to temperature. So so you got to see the whole time that it takes to get there this time. Put on my protective goggles, and let's see if it's ready. It looks ready. Okay, again, hot. I'm going to set it on here, not touch it with my hands. And I'm going to use my tongs to pick it up while it's this hot. And here it is. It's white on one side and gray on the other. And it's going to cool pretty quickly on this stone. I can take off my glasses now. Okay, it's coming along there. It's a gray on one side, white on the other. And once it cools just a little bit, we're gonna sift on the green Luna color, and then we'll pop it back in the kiln. So let's see if it's cool enough to go on here. Oh, looks like it is now. They cool down pretty fast because it's just a thin piece of metal. So again, I'm going to sift this green enamel. You don't want to breathe the enamel. I often do wear a mask, or I almost always wear a mask when I'm sifting, but it looks pretty good. Now, in it goes. Again, we put all this stuff on. The fun thing about enameling is you're really in and out of the kiln, in and out, and it's kind of exciting because you get your results quickly. You get to see what's going on, and sometimes those results you're not happy with, but you know, you can work with it, you can change things, you can put another layer on. There's a lot you can do to fix things. You know, you compare that to a ceramics kiln. Ceramics has to fire for, it's usually almost 24 hours by the time you put pieces in the ceramic kiln, fire it all the way through its scheduled firing, and then it's cool enough to open and take them back out. So at least like 24 hours. So in this case, this is fast. I'll show you. Well, while we're waiting for that, let's get this butterfly Luna. So I think this is the size I want. You can see I've printed them in different sizes so I can make different size buttons. And I can see that my kiln is getting up to temperature. I don't really want this paper to come too close to my kiln. That's constantly what you have to be careful of. And normally I wouldn't necessarily be doing this right in front of my kiln, but I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. So I cut it kind of closely. And then what I'm going to do is set this into some water so that it can come away from the paper, that it's the paper backing that it's attached to. I set that right there. My button is ready to come out of the kiln now. And hopefully we got a good coating with that layer, so that I don't need to, I won't need a second layer of green. and I might. I mean, a lot of times I do put a second, most of the time I would put a second layer on. So I'm gonna let that cool down. This is hot, so I kind of want to put it away, out of the way for now. And this is looking pretty good. Not quite cool enough to show you. Well, let's see, I'll use the tongs. So now we have a pale green for Luna Moth. And of course our Luna Moth is going to be brown, a little bit of a brown color on this green. So let's see if this is how this is coming along. This is, see how it's sliding. You probably can't see that, but it's sliding off the paper. And when it does that, it's ready to transfer on to the button. I'm just going to do that right here so I can see what I'm doing. And there we go. So I think about where the buttonholes are going to be and how it's going to line up before I place it. Now, that is on there, and it's going to have to, it's wet, so it's going to have to really dry out before I can fire it. And usually, just to make sure that it's completely dry and there's no bubbles underneath, I will dry it for about 24 hours. Hi, so there, some time has lapsed since I was last here because, as I said, I needed to let this image that I put on, I'm going to show you a little closer, that I put on with the water. I wanted to have a chance for it to dry out. Now, if it doesn't dry out all the way, there can be air or water bubbles underneath it that can distort the image a little bit. When it fires, they can pop out and there can be little holes in it. So we'll see. I usually wait 24 hours, so we'll see how it comes out today. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just firing it at 900 just to burn off the material that the image is printed on right now. That will sit in there at 900 degrees for a few minutes and burn that off, and then the temperature will put up to 1350 or so, and then actually fire that image into the enamel button. Right now I wanted to show you, I have, since I was last here, I put this sweater on, which was knit for me by Jennifer of Huron Pond Designs, who is another vendor at this festival. I have my buttons put on, and it's a hand knit item, so I thought you might like to see how they look on a hand knit item. It's a little warm here today, so I'm not going to keep it on. But so while we're waiting for that to burn off, then the next step is to pop the kiln temperature up, put it in again quickly, and then hopefully we'll have an almost complete button. The thing that will happen is that the edges will be the one part that's not completely finished. After this image is fired in, the edges will have black around them from being in and out of the kiln, and like we saw when we put that in the acid before. And at this point, we don't want to put it in the acid. What I do for that at the end is to grind it off with a tool and then polish the edge, which I will show you. Let's see how this is coming along. It looks like it's not even back up to 800 or 900 degrees, and you can see that the image one, just for the sake of showing you, is turned very black. Can't quite. So it's not burned off yet, so we're gonna keep that going for a few minutes, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so this went in at 900 degrees until the plastic burned off. And it's not fired into the enamel yet. The plastic just burned off. So it needs to go in And now the temperature is hotter, so I'm actually going to put on all my stuff, which I didn't do last time. This is the final firing. It's going to go all the way up to temperature. It's going to melt the enamel enough that the image can fire in. You don't want to keep it in there too long, because if it begins to kind of settle into the liquid glass, then the image will dissipate a little bit and it won't be quite as crisp. So it needs to come out pretty close to when it just reaches temperature. Like it to get fired in, but not too comfortable, not floating down into the enamel. And I'm going to just check and make sure that I take it out close to when it gets to temperature, but I also like to see, and I usually reflect it in a little light to see if the whole thing is shiny, and that kind of indicates to me that the image fired in. I want to knock that off. Okay, so I think we're good. Take these off so I can see what I'm doing. So what we should be getting now is a brown image of a Luna moth. Looks like it's coming out pretty good here. I'm going to go ahead and flip this off. A final button that I did previously, this is what I'm shooting for, is a Luna moth on the green background, and this one is complete, and you can see that the edges are nice and clean. They've all been clean. This one is just cooling, and the color will come as it cools. It isn't always exactly the color when it's not all the way cool, but I can show you that it looks like it came out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that, even though I moved up the time and didn't wait my full 24 hours. You can see the edge is black, and that is the final step, is to clean that black edge off in my metalworking area. So that's what I'm going to show you next. This is where I do my metalworking, cutting, hammering, things like that, and polishing. So I have this tool that I use to remove the black from the edge, and then I have another polishing tool that I'm going to use to smooth it and make it a nice copper finish. So what I do first of all is that I have this little hood that protects me from flying debris, and I also have a little air filter that suctions air that way away from me, because when I'm doing button after button after button, I could be spending hours sitting here grinding away at these. So I always wear either protective eyewear or a pair of glasses to protect my eyes. And I when I'm doing a lot of them all at once, even though I've got the airflow going away from me, I also wear my respirator like this. So I'm protected from flying particles. This is, you can hear when it's running, it's sectioning air out that way, but I'm going to turn that off for now. And so under here, I just grind this with my tool. And you can see that now this edge has gone from what was black like this to shiny copper. And that is what I'm after. So I will do the entire piece with that, and then I will switch tools and do the same thing with the polishing, just to make it a nice shiny edge. And that is the complete process for making a Luna moth enamel button.